Attorney General, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
If you want to call the Attorney General or text in a question, it's 877-301-8097. If you happen to be at the library and would like to ask her a question face-to-face, you go see our colleague Zoe. Hello, Zoe, right there. And Zoe will decide whether or not your question is worthy, is the bottom line. Did I say good to see you?
Yes.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
I'm
I'll
glad to hear
receive
it.
that.
Thank you.
So, Attorney General, we're always talking about the housing crisis in Massachusetts. It's become an issue in the presidential race as well. And the SJC is considering the law, I think it's almost 4 years old now, that would alleviate some of the state's housing crisis by allowing zoning changes to have more affordable housing around the MBTA stations. Right. And there's a couple of towns that are opposing it. One of them is Milton. The SJC heard the case against Milton, and if Milton wins, what happens then?
Well, we're not there yet. Kudos to my team that recently went into the SJC to argue this very important case. And I'm glad that it's become an issue at the federal level because affordability is the #1 concern that people have here in Massachusetts and across this country. Everything is too expensive. Housing, health care, daycare, groceries, you name it. And as we take on this fight to enforce the MBTA communities law, I'm telling folks to pay attention. Milton is the only municipality that is out of compliance currently. Others that have missed some deadlines still have an opportunity to come into compliance, and we're going to continue to work with them, providing technical assistance as we always have. We did not sue Milton lightly, right? We did this after being reasonable with them, and they refused to come into compliance. So, of course, we ended up in court. And why I'm stressing this is important is because it's one way that we can address the housing crisis here in Massachusetts. It is close to $1 million. The median sales price to buy a home here in Massachusetts is close to $1 million. That affects young people, young families, elders who want to downsize or stay in their community. Everyone should be concerned about this fight and our fight against Milton, but most importantly, to enforce the MBTA communities law is just to make sure we have one tool in our toolkit to bring on solutions to the housing affordability crisis, along with all the other tools. And so I'm confident after the Supreme Court heard our arguments here, of course, that they will, the Supreme Court, our SJC, our Supreme Court, that they will come out in our favor. And so we're waiting for their response.
But they may not, obviously. And
let's keep it hopeful and optimistic.
I guess the question is, if they rule for Milton, does this put the whole law into jeopardy?
It absolutely does, and I think the court will take that into consideration. If they rule in Milton's favor and continue to allow Milton to remain in non-compliance, the effect this will have on other municipalities, the confusion it will cause that this law is not mandatory. It says shall means shall, it is mandatory. If they go against that, it not only will create confusion for the municipalities, but most importantly, it will take away a significant tool that a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature came together to pass.
Charlie Baker
to
signed
actually
this,
help us with housing. And I want to add one other point because I think it's sometimes lost. Many of the housing tools that we have, laws on the books, they're voluntary. They're not mandatory. And so the legislature looked at, are these voluntary tools that we have effective? No, because then it allows municipalities to do whatever they want. This case, this law says, no, you can't do what you want. You can't pick and choose what laws to come into compliance with. And the MBTA communities law is clear that it's mandatory.
So one more time, if they rule against you, I know you hope they don't, and you were convinced they won't. If they do, I think there are 177 communities covered by the law. Am I right so far?
I think it's 176.
Okay, close, and a little less than half.
Oh, maybe it's 177.
Whoa,
you were right,
that's a little embarrassing, isn't it? Okay,
Off by
I'm
one.
kidding. So a little less than half have signed on, have adopted this thing. Here's the question: should the court do what you don't want it to do, and rule against this law? Each of those communities could then vote to opt out of this whole thing, or right away is their vote negated because the law that their vote was based upon is being negated. Do you understand what I'm saying?
A little bit.
I know
but-
you don't want. I know you don't want to anticipate this, but I guess let me put it more clearly. If the SJC, the Supreme Judicial Court, rules against you, is the vote of the 70-some communities that have adopted this negated as of that moment?
Well, I'm not going to deal in hypotheticals because we're not there yet. And
Okay.
the power of the court is to determine a whole bunch of things. Who knows what they're going to come back with?
Okay.
What I do want to highlight is Milton is the outlier, and right now we have 78 communities that are in full compliance that frankly need to be getting the attention they deserve because these communities have gone out to do education with their residents. They have rolled up their sleeves to come into compliance. We're going to celebrate them as we recently did with the governor and Secretary Augustus, and we're going to continue to work to provide technical assistance to municipalities to come into compliance. And for those who are listening, if you live in a community where of course, housing affordability is a crisis, not one community should, of course, respond and sort of have to bear the brunt of responding to this crisis. It's a statewide solution that is required. If you have a public good that is the T in your community, there is an expectation with our technical assistance that you will help us build more housing near public transit, which is good for our housing crisis and, of course, also good for climate justice.
Okay, one last thing before we get to the calls and texts at 877-301-8970. The race for the presidency only 3 weeks from today is Election Day. I believe early voting starts on Saturday in Massachusetts. One of the issues that's putting Kamala Harris in a tough spot, somebody with whom you have a very close relationship, we learned a few weeks ago, personal relationship in addition to a professional one, is while black women are just as faithful to the Democratic ticket as they have been for years, black men, particularly young black men, are not supporting Harris in the same numbers that they supported Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. Here's a little bit of what Barack Obama had to say about this, the President Obama, when he was in Pittsburgh criticizing black men who he said make excuses for not voting for Vice President Harris. Here's Obama.
And you're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. Part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And so now you're thinking about sitting out or even supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is, putting women down. That's not acceptable.
How do you, one, I'd like your thoughts about what the President Obama had to say, but how do you explain particularly young black men not supporting this ticket in the same sort of numbers as I say that they supported both Clinton and Biden?
Well, I'm always clear, or skeptical, I should say, of polls and surveys of people, including people of color, because I often question who are you going to, where are you going, and who are you talking to. I know what is abundantly clear to me is that voters of color, black men, black women, people of color, have an apathy with respect to voter engagement, civic engagement, and I don't blame them. And so I'm going to push back on our former president, who I have the utmost respect for. I'm not going to blame them. You have politicians and candidates that go into communities promising they're going to do certain things, and they don't deliver. And they also promise things they will never be able to deliver on, that they're going to eradicate poverty, for example, eradicate violence. No one person can do that overnight. Absolutely not. And what I respect and love about Kamala Harris, who I am close with, is that she has done the work as Attorney General, as a district attorney, of course as Vice President, and as a senator in the past. Where I can lift up her work is as AG. You have significant tools, for example, to take on consumer protection, to help wipe out student loan debt, which the last I checked is one way to close the racial wealth gap. She did that to make sure that folks are not discriminated against as they go out to get a loan to start a business or to get a loan to buy a home, which of course builds wealth. So this recent agenda that she put out, specifically focused on black men, I applaud.
Yesterday.
Because it builds on her leadership in the past and says, I'm going to fight for you, I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to make sure that I do things that are actually in response. And that plan says, I'm going to give out 1 million loans that are all forgivable, up to $20,000 to black men who are seeking to be entrepreneurs. I'm going to make sure that discrimination doesn't continue to be a barrier to you getting the resources that you deserve in order to grow a business or to grow your wealth.
Why
I'm
didn't
gonna expand.
you said you were talking about not delivering in the past. on campaign promises. Why didn't the Biden-Harris administration do in its 4 years the things that Harris is proposing that should be done yesterday?
I think she sought to do some of that. But let's be clear, Kamala Harris is not Joe Biden. You're vice president, you serve as at the pleasure of the president. And there was a lot of things she did that focused on this population. Now she's running to be president, where she has significant power, leeway to craft her plans for a population of folks, including black men and black women, and to actually demonstrate not only she's done it in the past to close this racial wealth gap, but also will continue to work to do just that. Not blaming folks for not being civically engaged, but saying, please take a risk on me. Take a risk and vote for me because I'm going to deliver. And most importantly, let's not forget that the person on the other side who was promising things that we know he will not deliver on, it's a total charade. This was a gentleman who, of course, in New York with his father, discriminated specifically against black residents, including black men, in terms of access to housing. The same gentleman who also discriminated against black residents in terms of access to capital or to banking when he had the power to do otherwise. So I just say to folks, do not trust what he's saying. Take a risk on this woman who will deliver for you and do so much more. And if she doesn't accomplish that in 4 years, then you have the right to go back out and exercise your right to vote to come up with a different choice. But in this moment in time, the contrast is stark between who will deliver for our people and who will not. And I'll add, yes, she is a black woman, and she stands in that, but she will never use that to take for granted this idea that black people will just vote for black people. She's going to do the work to earn their support. And I respect her wholeheartedly for that, too.
The number is 877-301-8970.
Yeah, before we get to the calls, I just want to mention, you got these new informational flyers for college kids, new citizens, incarcerated individuals. What's that all about?
So voting, obviously, just not only talking about Kamala Harris and the top of the ticket, how important it is to get out and vote, and to do something, as Michelle Obama said, people vote here in Massachusetts, but most importantly, if you have time, call into these battleground states and help mobilize other people, mobilize your families, everybody you know, because this is the most important election of our lifetime. But we didn't forget that here in Massachusetts, we also want to continue to mobilize people. So we're telling folks, you have the right to vote if you're over 18. Even if you were formerly incarcerated and you were out, you have the right to vote. And folks who are inside, the same. We're working with houses of correction, the Department of Correction as well. There is an exception, of course, if you have been convicted of a felony.
Yes.
So we're putting out information on what these rights are to make it clear to folks that they have the right to vote. You can go on our website. We'll put some information on social media as well to get folks to not only register to vote, the deadline is August 26th here in Massachusetts, but also to encourage our people to get out and vote. Your voices matter. I know for me personally, we cannot do the work we do if it's not from a bottom-up approach. Top-down doesn't work, and the only way your voices are really heard is if you exercise your right to vote here in Massachusetts.
Let's go. Can we go to somebody to start who's in the audience here? Is Lashana in the neighborhood? Lashana, please come up to the mic. You're on with the Attorney General.
Say
Welcome.
your name correctly.
Yes, my name is Lashina Butler, Lashina Jones Butler.
My
Good
apologies.
to see you, Lashina.
And I have a question for Andrea because
Andrea.
as Andrea.
Yeah.
So us in the black community come to your office and we notice like y'all speak of black and brown and color, but who's really doing the work for reparations and to giving the colored people what they deserve because we're suffering? And then
Agreed.
how come there's like no colored people in your office to take racial discrimination complaints where y'all feel as though we have to give you so much information like you don't know that we are racially discriminated against and you don't fight for us at all? So when
Lashana,
you,
we got it. We should let
Okay.
the Attorney General respond to both your issues.
Thank you for your
Go ahead,
question.
Attorney General.
I will say, I work with an incredible team. We have over 700 lawyers and staff, fully staffed. We have an office in Boston, one in Springfield, one in New Bedford, and also one in Worcester. And I want to discount those other offices that do a lot of work. I will say people who work hard, who are underpaid, and frankly dedicated to service. It is a diverse team. What I do recognize, I want to be candid, I inherited a team where we have to, of course, make sure that the office reflects the communities we serve. And I'm working on that. But this idea, I won't say, but I'm not going to negate what you said. I get that struggle. I live in Mattapan now. I have loved ones as I stand here as AG who are currently incarcerated. I share my story openly. I stand here as AG with both parents who were deceased, all my grandparents who were deceased, a twin brother who died while in the custody of the Department of Correction. I've never forgotten where I come from and why I do this work. And so I'll give you some examples of how we're working to address the inequities you're talking about. I mentioned housing earlier. I can't remember the last time an attorney general sued a municipality to bring about better housing and better housing outcomes for the constituents in Massachusetts. I can't remember the last time an AG focused on student loan debt. That is a $1 billion issue right here in Massachusetts, affecting millions of residents, but mainly single black women households. Targeted that because it's one way to close a racial wealth gap. We are currently, for the first time in the history of the office, we convened a group of folks to talk about those who are formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated. The first time the office ever held a convening of those dealing with reentry issues, not under a reentry umbrella that's separate and apart, under our economic portfolio work. So I'm only in year 2, and already we've gotten the Elder Justice Unit off the ground, the Reproductive Justice Unit off the ground, the Gun Violence Prevention Unit off the ground, the Police Accountability Unit off the ground, and so much more. I never take it for granted. We're going to keep fighting the fight. So I'm not sure what your individual experience is like. I am happy to follow up and to make sure that as you engage with our office, we're helping you as best we can. We do the best we can with a sense of urgency, because I, along with the people I serve with, have never forgotten why we do this work.
Let's take some calls.
Sue in Hopkinton, thank you for calling.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, Jim. Hi, Marjorie. Thank you so much for taking my call,
Sure.
Attorney General.
Thank you.
My question is, I'm a longtime nurse at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and we were in contract negotiations, as some of you may have known. We thought we settled. Mostly our focus was to have a more equitable health plan. We were paying a lot of money for the Mass General Brigham health care insurance, which is pricey. The only other option was Harvard Pilgrim. Many of us opted. We were given the opportunity to move to Harvard Pilgrim, which was, for my family anyway, much more reasonable, financially affordable. So we were supposed to make our choices very soon, meaning tomorrow, and now we are being told that Harvard Pilgrim Health Plan is not in accordance with state law, and each one of us who are 18 and over are going to be charged $2,000 per person per tax season because Harvard Pilgrim is not in accordance with the law. And we feel like, as nurses, and there's over 4,000 of us trying to figure this out, we feel as though we weren't, during contract negotiations, told this.
So, Sue, if I may, do you have a question for the
Sue
Attorney
should stay
General?
on.
Like, what should we do? Is that, in fact, factual? Because Harvard Pilgrim isn't telling us whether or not
Got
they
it.
cannot tell us the truth, whether or not we are going to be charged $2,000.
Let's hear what the
per
Attorney
person.
General has to say, Sue. Thank you for your call.
Thank you, Sue. If you could stay on, I'm not in the weeds right now, obviously, with respect to your recent conversations with Brigham, but obviously one is personal for you and it may be affecting others. But if you could stay on, Martin from my team is here. We'll follow up on this, but please don't hang up, and we'll sort of see what we can do to help.
We'll get your contact information, Sue, so do stay on hold if you don't mind. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970.
Lori from
Lori?
Berlin?
Salem?
Salem?
One of them.
Yes,
We're-
Berlin.
Okay, Berlin. Welcome
Berlin,
to the
okay.
show. Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, Marjorie, George, and Attorney General. Thank
Wait
you
a
for
second.
taking my call.
George?
It's Jim, Lori,
I'm
but
only
that's
kidding.
okay.
I'm only kidding.
General.
It's close enough. It's fine. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lori. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wait, is this Lori?
so
Is this
in-
Lori?
This is Lori.
Okay, hi,
yes.
Lori.
Yeah, I'm George. Go ahead. Go ahead, Lori.
No. And on September 5th, the Mass Alliance Against Predatory Lending provided the Supreme Judicial Court with 20,000 plus public record documentation that the banks had started eviction cases with the wrong bank listed. In the past, you have said you would help us with redlining. Now we're more
Hold on for a second.
Okay, it's better.
She
you
can
hear?
hear it. Go ahead,
Okay.
I'm Lori. I'm sorry we had a sound problem, but continue.
Now we're more into reverse redlining where they're giving predatory loans and taking the homes. Will you help us?
So, Laura, if you could stay on, would love to hear more details specifically about this, but whether it's reverse redlining or mortgage companies that are doing all types of engaging in deceptive practices to get people pushed out of their home or to take their money, we are absolutely prioritizing that. We actually just had a settlement with one servicer who came back. We call them zombie mortgages,
Yeah. Tell us about that.
who frankly, they're no longer operating in Massachusetts. A zombie mortgage is so back in around the housing crisis, right, 2008, 2009, people were coming out of that, they're buying homes. So they have they would typically go in and get two mortgages. So sometimes they didn't know there were two mortgages. One was for most of the mortgage to buy the house. The second was for the down payment. What folks are now doing, savvy, is to try to go back and find the paperwork for those zombie mortgages. We call them zombie because people literally thought this debt was wiped out. They were done. They're living in their home. And there was a woman in Quincy who shared her story. It's paying her monthly mortgage every month. This is a different service provider, but paying her monthly mortgage every month, and all of a sudden people show up to try to push her out of her home. So this particular service provider, Franklin, I think it's Franklin Credit. We won a settlement. We were going to get these folks back their money. They can no longer operate here in Massachusetts, no longer pull this debt that people have thought is completely wiped out. They haven't received any statements. That's why you really think it's wiped out, and then someone comes out of nowhere to say, no, you owe us hundreds of thousands of dollars. We said, no, not here in Massachusetts. So we're getting folks the restitution back on this, and also anyone who's faced potential foreclosure on this will also make sure that they have the resources they need to hopefully get back into housing.
Did you say you wanted her to stay on?
Yes,
Yeah,
Lori, stay on because
same
yours
deal.
is very specific.
Stay on. We'll get your contact information to a representative of the Attorney General's
You know, our
office.
texters are reminding us that there still are a few more days to register to vote, October 26th.
Yes, October
Yeah,
26th.
October 26th.
It's the
So you
deadline.
still have
And you
time.
can do it in person at your local election official by 5 or online.
You know, Attorney General, credit to our colleagues at New England Public Media in Western Massachusetts. They've been following this story for years. Your predecessor, who's now the governor, did a report on abuse by priests and others in non-Boston archdiocese a couple of years ago. You, when asked about it, promised transparency. It's been several years. Why has this report not been released?
It's in the courts. That's all I can say right now.
Why is it in the courts? What are the
That's
courts
all
up
I
to?
can say right now in terms of whether or not it can be released.
Well,
And
I'm not asking you to give us content, obviously, but why do the courts have anything to do with whether or not a report you did, your office did, should be released to the public?
So I took over, got this report, and now it's in the courts to determine whether or not it can be released. And that's all I can say.
But who, I don't mean to be a pain in the neck, who even brought it? It was done internally. Why are the courts, I'm not trying to be difficult, I just don't, why are the courts
So-
even involved?
To be able to create the report in the first place, it relies on numerous sources, including grand jury proceedings. You got to be careful with grand jury, which typically, of course, is secretive, and there's a special way in which these proceedings happen. In order to then get it out in the public view, you have to get permission if all parties don't agree to release it. It's currently in the courts.
What kind of time
So
frame
I
are we
will
talking
say,
about?
that's up to the court. I will say, I do believe in transparency. I do believe that if you have reports and you can release it, to do so. So I would just say, ask the public to continue to be patient with me. And I have to be clear. I obviously come before this from the city council where I had greater discretion in what I could say and what I could release. This is very different. The position, while it may have a greater impact in the work, and it does, is not, I can only share so much. And so in this particular instance, I can only share so much, but I ask the public to be patient, and
Well-
we will be transparent when we get to that point.
One last thing about patience. There's an organization, I know I speak for Marjorie, we have huge admiration for Bishop Accountability, and they've done some wonderful work through
Yes.
decades of this. One of their leaders is quoted in a story, says, it means the failure to release the report. It means that those priests are not going to be a danger to children anymore because this is all out in the open. Obviously, the flip of that is, as long as it's not out in the open, there may be priests who are found to be responsible for sexual violence against children or others whose names are not public, and they may be tending to people right now who are at risk?
I take sexual abuse allegations, you know I'm a mom of 2 boys, very seriously, by whoever. In this particular case, I inherited a report that was completed, sitting there. And now I'm doing what I can to see what we can do in terms of releasing it. But that being said, it's not up to me personally.
Yeah.
It
Maybe
has
the
to go-
archdiocese
It
doesn't
has to
want
go
this
through
released,
a process,
Jim.
and that process now involves the court. And folks will know when it concludes where we end up. I will definitely
That's a
report
good last
that back.
question, though. Are the 3 archdioceses involved the ones that are objecting to its release?
I don't know if I can even say that.
Okay.
Well, it's a good guess.
But if I can't,
would say.
I'll say this.
Who else could
I
it
will
be?
follow up based on what I can share. As of right now, I can say it's in the courts.
Okay.
Okay. We have another audience question from Paul.
Paul.
Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you.
Paul.
For
Good to see you again.
Hello again. Good to see you again. Thanks for stopping by. I noticed that you're going to be at the Climate Beacon conference later on in the week. I'll be there.
Awesome.
My question is, what can we do to force the utility companies to provide 100% clean electricity, that is solar and wind, not nuclear, as you know very well? And also, the secondary question is, why can't we have as much solar as we want? Why can't we put up as much solar as we want? For example, if we wanted to put it on the roof, they tell us how much we can put up, and tough luck, and the utility companies won't pay us for extra power we generate. We just get these useless credits. So
Attorney-
what can we do about all that stuff?
Thank you,
So,
Paul. Attorney
Thank
General.
you.
Thank
you so much.
I probably need a whole nother hour to address that, Paul, and I'll, of course, be more focused at the Climate Beacon Conference, which I'll be there with the team. So one area I want to highlight is the AG's office is the ratepayer for the state, and most folks don't know that. So on this conversation actually around affordability, utility bills are too expensive. Our office plays a direct role in that, in challenging and, of course, working with utilities, but also challenging where rate increases that are proposed are too high. We go before the DPU, which is a state agency, and it's a back and forth. It requires experts, a lot of resources at different times to get rates that are affordable, reasonable, most importantly, reasonable for our constituents. So that involves working with utilities here and there, right? We are still in a transition to clean energy. It is not going to happen overnight. And frankly, what this division is responsible for is to ensure that as it happens, it doesn't happen on the backs of poorer residents, residents of color, those in Western Mass, rural communities that often feel left out. So that advocacy is happening every day. But it involves the DPU. It involves our siting board, which is also a state agency. So it's not always entirely up to our control in terms of decision making, but I will ensure you, Paul, and others, we are fighting, I was going to say fight, I'm going to say it, fighting like hell to ensure that the rates that people are presented with are the most reasonable, while also, of course, protecting this idea that you still need resources to run, obviously, energy into households. So we're doing our best.
Thank
And
you
I'll
for the
share
question.
more at the conference, which is this Friday, for sure, on specifics. And that's just one part of our climate and environmental justice work.
So, Attorney General,
Thank you.
congratulations. I know it was you and the state police and some other law enforcement agencies were all involved in this arresting for dealing drugs, a major drug trafficking operation. But I was curious, it's a wiretapping investigation, but I wondered, if you're one of these people that was living in one of these apartments in Methuen, where there was a lot of drug dealing in these multiple apartments in this building. I wonder what happens. Do people call up and say there's a lot of people running in and out of the place next door, or I hear and they had guns in there and stuff like that? How does that happen?
So, first of all, I just have to say I'm so proud of the Crim Bureau and the office. We've been talking a lot about the civil work that we do, but we have a criminal bureau that works really hard, including with our Enterprise and Major Crimes Division. We have a state police unit within the office. All of these folks work hard, and we often do investigations that last a long time. So this recent one in Lawrence and Methuen lasted 11 months. You
Wow.
folks, talk about public servants. They didn't have a summer, right? They were up on a wire in a community where if you went into that community and talk about racial equity, predominantly people of color. black and brown folks who have been complaining for years about the drug activity, the open drug market in this community, elder folks taking out their trash, creeping into their homes because they're afraid, children going into their housing but walking through a drug deals or something happening in real time. So I'm proud of this team that gets out every single day to take guns and drugs off the street and to say that we're not going to accept that, right? Every community deserves to be safe. Every community deserves to be drug and gun free, especially poor communities, just as much as any other community. And so this team was up on a wire. They just came down. This is actually
What do
involved.
you mean up on a wire?
It may sound like the wire, but an actual wire where you are monitoring, and I'm renewing affidavits for wires.
On the wiretap, you mean?
Exactly.
They weren't up in the air.
No, on the wiretap.
Okay.
But I will say 11 folks were arrested. That is currently moving through the courts. Tons and tons of drugs, of course.
And fentanyl.
And fentanyl, other types of drugs
Meth.
too, and weapons, of course, confiscated. And I will say, while it involved our office, we do this in a regional network of folks. So it involved other law enforcement agencies. The collaboration is quite remarkable. So close to 200 officers were involved.
Wow.
And it's a big takedown. But the other piece that I want to stress, and I think the Crim Bureau would say the same. Yes, we want to target what is happening in terms of illicit activity in these communities, but we also want to address the root causes of what creates that in the first place, the violence that we see. So it does mean bringing in resources on the jobs front, on the economic front. There's some of that we can do. We can't do that by ourselves. It does also mean taking on the health disparities, the lack of clean air, environmental injustice in these same communities. The educational outcomes are typically abysmal. Our Children's Justice Unit working with school districts to address that. So this holistic approach through a public health lens is what the office does every single day. And this is just one example of what this division and what this Crim Bureau does on a regular basis to protect our people. Because the last I checked, I don't care what tangible things we provide folks. If you don't feel safe in your community, if you feel targeted because of hate or anything else, well, what good is it for? And so we're taking on hate, we're taking on this violence, and we're taking on drugs as well.
And when you say open drug market, so people would be coming downstairs and they would see people selling, buying drugs right in front of
If
them.
you were to go and interview the folks that lived in some of the housing developments there, as some remarked when the arrests were happening, there were folks who came out to thank those officers, probably with tears in their eyes, for finally someone doing something. Okay. This is what is the state of affairs in that community. So I think if you were to go out and interview those folks and ask them what they were experiencing, the stories would be depressing, would be hard to hear. So I'm proud of this portfolio of work, which is just as important, of course, as all the other work in helping our folks feel safe.
We're getting a lot of texts concerning the trooper-to-be, Enrique Delgado Garcia, and the next call is asking for an update. Rama, somewhere in central Massachusetts, it says, I guess. Welcome to the show. You're on with the Attorney General. Hi. Hello?
Rama, is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
he's not there.
but
you know,
we can ask
as long as you brought it up, you were at the graduation for the latest class of troopers, and according to the Globe, you spoke directly to the dead trooper's family when you were Enrique Delgado Garcia's family when you were talking. What'd you say?
Well, a couple of things. This is a horrific case. I cried probably like many others when they got the news. He was 25 years old, training to become a state trooper, a job he dreamed of holding to serve us and to serve the Commonwealth. It is horrific. It is sad. It is depressing. I've met the family. I met them at the wake, and of course, extended my condolences. Folks who know me know I'm a praying woman. I believe in God and the grace of God, so I continue to pray for them. And of course, appointed a special investigator to look into the circumstances of this whole case, to have the independence that he would need, this is David Meyer, to conduct a thorough investigation. And that will take time. And so I said to the family then, and they understand this also through their lawyer, I thank them in advance for their patience. And I thank the community as well, who he used to work with in Worcester when he was
Victims'
a victim.
right, yeah.
He was a victim
Victims
witness
advocate,
advocate at Worcester DA's office. So I thank the community in advance for their patience. What I added at the funeral for the men and women who just graduated as a part of the new state police class, who are now getting their cruisers and hitting the streets to protect all of us, that they too feel the same pain and suffering that the family does. This was a classmate. For months, they were in training together, seeking to accomplish something and to, of course, serve all of us in terms of public safety and protection. This is a calling that they feel that's bigger than them. They're not doing it because you make the biggest bucks. They're doing it because they truly believe in service and protection, just as Enrique did. So I acknowledge that pain and suffering that this particular class has felt, that I think at moments has been lost in the media narrative. I saw them exiting his wake, and then, of course, they attended the funeral, and the tears rolling down his classmates' eyes. They were devastated, and they continue to be devastated. But they're rolling up their sleeves with courage to still serve us, honoring Enrique in the process. And I said, you can't have that be lost. They cared deeply about this young man, as we all do, but they knew him personally, and they knew him up close, and you develop friendships. And in this moment in time when we are asking for accountability, which I believe in, and transparency from the state police, yes, we can have that while also acknowledging the suffering of this class and also how tough it is to be a state trooper. The case I just mentioned, these were folks doing undercover operations, going into harm's way every day at all hours in order to take down folks who were causing significant harm and pain in that community in Lawrence and Methuen and surrounding communities. So you can have both. And so I actually pushed back even on the media. I said the media has the power of the pen, social media, the platform. And so how we frame things is really important. And in this moment in time, I thought it was really important to name that for these recruits who work so hard to graduate as a part of this class.
Could you answer one quick thing that I should know the answer to? Is David Meyer independent, meaning does he make his own decision and announces it, or does he report to you and you either approve or disapprove or amend what he...
He's within my office, but he has significant independence. And what I mean by that is we will give him resources as he needs it, but he's going to form his own investigatory team, which he's in the process of doing. He's going to conduct his investigation, go out to do the witnesses all on his own. He's also going to bring any particular charges. It's all in his wheelhouse.
So you don't have to sign off on his
No.
determination?
If anything,
Okay.
we are just there as support and any additional
Understood.
resources that he would need because of that conflict that existed.
I'm sorry, Shirley and Newton, you're on with the Attorney General. Welcome to the show. Hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Wow, thanks for having me on. My name
Hi,
is
Shirley.
Shiley, actually, not Shirley.
What's your name
sorry.
again?
Yeah,
Shiley.
Newton.
So
Shiley.
sorry. So sorry.
No, that's quite all right. So my question is about the new legislation that requires towns that are near a T-stop to create more housing. So I live in Newton Center, and we have one green line, I think it's a D line, that runs east and west, and that's it. That's the only T-stop we have, a T line that we have. And it basically does nothing to get anybody who lives here around locally. And everyone knows that everyone who's ever driven down Route 9 will tell you that the traffic in this area is horrible. So I wonder if the state, when they're making these determinations about what accessible communities are, if there's been any consideration made for traffic amelioration.
Shirley, thanks.
So it's a great question. Even, coming from the city council, as we approve development projects, developers were often frustrated because they wanted the transportation and infrastructure and the streets to be improved at the same time. And yes, that's on the city, that's on the state to be able to do that. I think the governor would say, and municipal leaders, they are investing in that and they still have work to do. But what I love about the MBTA communities law is not only do I think it's mandatory to help us address this housing crisis, it affords municipalities great flexibility and discretion. It literally gives them the ability to choose where is best in their municipality to create this housing that is close to transportation, that allows it to be, of course, for families and others to help us alleviate this crisis. It's not a one-size-fit-all approach, and the regulations get that. And at the same time, I absolutely support the need to, of course, improve our transportation infrastructure, the T as well. I agree there's more work that can be done.
That's the Attorney General. She's with us for another handful of minutes.
Let's go to Mary in the car. Hi, Mary.
Hello, Mary.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. First time caller.
Thank you.
And I realized that when I turned on my car, the Attorney General was talking about the housing situation, and I understand that it's a crisis here. And I live in Melrose, where it's a very quiet neighborhood, an old neighborhood. Our house is 130 years old. And there's a street that offshoots ours that abuts conservation land. And we have been fighting for the last 5 years to keep it protected, because there is a house up there that the Sons wanted to sell and build multiple housing up there. And then they sold it, and it became in the hands of developer. They want to build a 34 unit on this dead-end street with 6 houses on it, with something like 74 parking spots, in a very quiet, old neighborhood.
Mary, what's the question?
The question is, do you just build wherever because you can, or is there any, because I mean, it even went to the state, and the mayor's written letters, so.
We got it. I think
It's quiet.
Yeah.
we got it. Let's hear what the Attorney General has to say, Mary. Thank you.
I don't know about that specific project. That is distinct. So where I have my lane is to enforce the laws of the Commonwealth. And the MBTA communities law is a law that was passed by a legislature, and now my job is to enforce it. So that is my focus. On individual development projects, that is up to the local municipality, the local elected officials. Some have zoning boards, et cetera. So I'm not sure what this is specifically, but Mary, so that is for that municipality. My job is to enforce the MBTA communities law, to provide technical assistance to municipalities to help create that housing. And I will add the state, back to, I think it was Shiley's question, not Shirley, was the state is providing resources and funding to help with this infrastructure. They get, as you bring about more housing, you have to improve the T, you have to improve infrastructure. So I stood with the governor, Secretary Augustus, the LG recently on a Catalyst grant, other resources that are being made available by the state to help with infrastructure. Milton even took advantage of some of that funding when they were creating their plans. So we want to make sure that more municipalities that are coming into compliance have access to those resources, and we will.
How are you voting on the 5 ballot questions?
I don't know how I'm voting on all of them yet. The mushroom one has me a little still confused, but I heard you're going to have a little debate.
We did. You missed it.
Okay, so I'll
It's online
have to
tonight.
go back.
Which ones have you made your
I
mind
don't
up
want to
on?
get in the middle of that. Let me just, question 1, I'm not sure yet, but I will say this. It's obviously, I believe in auditing the legislature. You just have to do it within constitutional constraints. Elimination of MCAS, I was here before and I said I'm voting no on that. Unionization of drivers, yes, it actually builds
That's
upon.
question 3.
Question 3, it actually builds upon the work we did in our historic settlement for Uber and Lyft drivers to give them flexibility. And tip workers, absolutely voting yes, because tip workers also should have access to the minimum wage. The last I checked, you need good resources to be able to live and survive here in Massachusetts.
You know, we have a text about that too, because we had the debate about the tip wages yesterday, and there was a lot of talk about wage theft that people. And a texter wants to know how often you hear cases about this and what they can do about it, because it was brought up repeatedly yesterday. Did
And
you
we
hear
have a
about
minute,
that?
Attorney General.
A
Wage
minute?
theft.
Wage theft in the restaurant industry, yeah.
So wage theft is huge in hospitality industry. We have a whole division, Fair Labor Division, that actually puts out, that actually goes out to enforce wage theft against not only those who are employees, against our adults, but also our children. We're also prioritizing child labor law enforcement. And so this is in the millions, sadly. People going to work and not getting paid in the millions. But because
Wow.
I have a minute left, I have to name this.
What?
We are seeking your feedback. Val, wave your hand, Val.
Hello, Val.
Mary, wave your hand, Mary. They are from our
And
Elder
Mary.
Justice Unit, which we just got off the
we
ground to
met her,
focus
that's
on
right.
all things elders. And they have been walking around here, but also online and on social media, For the first time in the history of the office, we have put out, we want folks' responses on regulations for assisted living residences.
Oh, yes.
This is the first time in the history of the office that we're actually doing this. There's no current regulations for assisted living. So this may mean whether it is people not getting the services they said they're going to get, improper fees. So this consumer protection work in the context of assisted living facilities, important. The regulations will help us be able to do that work. So we're seeking feedback from folks. The form is online, on social media, or you can call the office, because we're doing work that
What's
is
your
responsive
website?
to
What's
our
your
elders.
website, quickly?
mass.gov/AGO.
mass.gov/AGO.
Or people can call 617-727-8400.
Nice to see you, Attorney General.
It's great to see all
Thank
of
you
you.
so
Thanks for
much,
having me.
Attorney
Thank you
General
very
Andrea
much.
Joy
Thank you
Campbell.
very
Yeah.